Welcome to The Kill File, your favorite true crime podcast. I'm your host, Brittany Spears. Each week, we will explore the dark corners of true crime, unsolved mysteries, and murder. Join me as we uncover secrets, investigate evidence, and dive into the chilling details of some of the most fascinating cases. Get ready for a journey into the dark unknown, because in The Kill File, nothing stays buried forever. Hey guys, welcome to episode 40 of The Kill File. I am so excited that you guys are back for another episode this week. But before we get started, I wanted to take a second to remind you guys to check out the website at thekillfile.com, where you can check out the merch site by clicking on Shop Merch. Also, there is a form on the website for you to let me know what cases that you want me to cover or check out as well. Also, thank you to those of you who have helped spread the word of The Kill File. I hope you will continue to do so with anyone and everyone that you can. I want to continue to grow our community of listeners because it will open up so many opportunities, not just for me, but for you guys as well. Remember that somewhere in the future, I will have some sort of a monthly service where you can get bonus content from me, extra episodes, etc. I'm not 100% sure when that will happen. If I had to guess, maybe towards the end of summer. I just want to tell you guys in advance to look out for that. I actually want to work on some of the bonus content first, and I have to learn how to go about doing that for a subscription service. I am learning all of this on the fly, so bear with me. Also, don't forget, if you are interested in helping out The Kill File, go ahead and click that download button for this episode so we can get a more accurate reading on how many listeners are here. And don't forget to follow or subscribe on whatever platform you are using to get weekly episodes from The Kill File every Monday. Okay, that's it for business. Let's talk about today's case. You guys, for episode 40, I am bringing you an especially gnarly, sick, twisted motherfucker that I can't believe existed. Today we are going to talk about Anatoly Slivko, a Soviet serial killer. Trigger warnings for today are going to be murder of minors, abuse of minors, necrophilic actions, description of crime scenes, talks of body mutilation of a minor, talks of suicide, and some talks of dismemberment, and some fucking sexual deviancy. Brace yourselves for this one, and here we go. In 1931, a tent would go up by station workers in preparation for the development of what was eventually going to be oil fields. This settlement would eventually lead to a city named Izberbash, in which the drilling of exploratory wells would begin in 1935. The oil field would soon be discovered in this area, and this would be the very reason that Izberbash would be placed on the map. One of the first families to have occupied this area and this settlement was the Slivko family. A man named Yemelyan Slivko would bring his wife and son Andrei to this area with excitement of work in the lucrative oil fields. Andrei would go on to have a younger brother in 1938, and this is where our story begins. Anatoly Emelianovich Slivko was born on December 28th in the year 1938 in the Dagestan settlement of Izberbash, and this is in Russia. Izberbash is actually a city inside of the Republic of Dagestan, and this is located on the western shore of the Caspian Sea. Today's population of this area is about 42,000 people. Anatoly would later say during his court hearings that his childhood was very dysfunctional, and also stated that his parents fought often, even before he was born. I couldn't figure out how many siblings Anatoly had, but I know that he had an older brother named Andrei and apparently a younger half-sister at some point. There was one fight in particular that must have been just over the top because it was alleged that after this awful fight between his parents, Anatoly's mother tried to cause herself to have a miscarriage. Miraculously, and although the umbilical cord was strangling him during birth, doctors were able to save the baby's life and Anatoly would live. I have a lot of questions about this for the mother, like how did she try to have a miscarriage back then? Did she just decide that it was a mistake and then go to the hospital, or did doctors get called to her house? Do you think that she resented Anatoly after that? Fascinating stuff. Unfortunately for Anatoly, although we don't really know if this is the cause, it was thought back then that the reason that Anatoly suffered from headaches as a child would be because of his traumatic birth. One source would go on to say that as a young child, Anatoly was considered an introvert and wasn't as social as other kids his age. While Anatoly was a young child, World War II was wreaking havoc across the globe, and during this same time, there was another war going on in Russia called the Great Patriotic War, and this would take place from 1941 to 1945. Anatoly would later admit that one memory that stuck out to him as a child was when he unfortunately was a witness to a German soldier killing a young boy from his hometown. It was said that after he witnessed the murders, Anatoly would watch as the soldier had used the boy's body to, quote, wipe the blood off his shiny black boots, end quote. That's not okay for anyone to see, let alone a child. Would this be the reason for Anatoly's perverted, twisted fantasies later in life? According to a biography about Anatoly Slivko, he would actually go on to show some of the first symptoms of possible epileptoid psychopathy, and that this could have led to his aggressive nature and sadism. After researching, there seems to be a link or at least a correlation existing between epilepsy and aggression, and according to Cambridge.org, if it's not from the comorbid personality disorder in relation to epilepsy, it could be the simple fact that anxiety and depression often come with epilepsy, and either one of these can lead to aggression. It is also thought that just fear alone in regards to epilepsy could be a reason for the aggression as well. If you remember, epilepsy is a seizure disorder that, depending on where the seizures occur in a specific person, can affect many areas of the brain and can cause all sorts of personality disorders or behavior changes, which makes sense. I may have went down a rabbit hole into the association of a psychotic disorder with epilepsy. That's just what I do. Anatoly was said to have played a seemingly normal childhood game with his friends in his younger years, which is cops and robbers. However, their version was Nazis and partisans instead, which is really scary and sad. Anyways, there was one particular time that Anatoly could remember where he himself had played a German soldier who had been hanged by partisans, and this would actually result in some short-term memory loss. When you know what's coming, this is actually terrifying. It was said that at some point in Anatoly's adolescence, he had realized that he was in fact gay, and unfortunately for him, had some impotence issues in his teenage years, and both of these things would cause him to feel extremely ashamed. After Anatoly had finished high school, he actually tried to get into Moscow University for college, but unfortunately was unable to get in. This is when he would decide to join and serve the Soviet Army in 1959. When Anatoly would return home after being discharged from the military for being unsuitable for military service due to some health issues, Anatoly would head back home. Now, onto the accident. So, when you research and read about Anatoly Slivko, you are going to read a ton about this quote-unquote accident that Anatoly witnessed that stuck with him the rest of his life and was said to be a huge part of his dark fantasies. In the year 1961, Anatoly would witness a horrific accident that would traumatize most of us, but for Anatoly, it gave him a different sensation. Anatoly would be witness to a traffic accident in where an alleged drunk driver on a motorcycle had accidentally swerved over into a group of people and would strike a young boy that was said to be about 13 or 14 years old. Anatoly would later describe this incident in his personal journal, saying, quote, "He was in a school uniform with a tie, a white shirt, and new black shoes. There was a lot of blood, gasoline spread on the asphalt. I suddenly had a feeling, a desire to have such a boy, to make him feel bad. Hurt," end quote. Apparently, when this poor boy was struck by the vehicle, a bunch of people ran over to see the boy laying on the ground, bleeding profusely and twitching. It was said that someone scooped up the child and ran over to a vehicle, presumably to take him for medical attention and try to save his life. Anatoly described the boy in the person's arms as already unconscious and with his arms having been limp with his head thrown back. Anatoly said, quote, "I was shocked by what I had just seen and couldn't compose myself for a long time," end quote. It was said that Anatoly was so surprised by his sexual arousal to the scene of the accident, the smell of gasoline, and the sight of this schoolboy dying, that he hopped on the nearest train and took off without luggage or any personal belongings, trying to outrun the memory of the motorcycle and the child. Of course, we now know that it would not help him, and in fact, it would seem to be the very thing that Anatoly would seemingly try to recreate time and time again. During one investigation conducted by police, Anatoly would admit, quote, "Every time he cried out in agony, I got more and more excited," end quote. After being away for a few months, it was said that Anatoly would return to live with his parents in Novosibirsk. Novosibirsk actually became its own city a little while before the war. Before then, it had been a small village with people living in small adobe houses, but afterwards, they began to dig a canal to then irrigate the land. When people started coming looking for work and helping with the irrigation, construction of a nitrogen fertilizer plant would start, where eventually the plant would end up producing chemical fertilizers. As the city began to grow, most of the people living there and working there were centralized around this chemical fertilizer plant. The city would start to construct schools, clubs, and stadiums. Anatoly and his older brother Andrei would both get jobs at this plant. Before Anatoly would be allowed to start at the plant, he apparently needed to attend a chemical and technological tech school, which he would then graduate from in 1963. Anatoly would gain his qualification for an operator and then was able to start his job at the plant. In Anatoly's personal journal, there was a section about a time he remembered having his first wet dream or ejaculation at the age of 22. He admittedly knew that he was a late bloomer when it came to sexual experiences and knowledge. I'm sure, because it's not like they talked about it openly back then. He explained that after his first wet dream, he would start to masturbate for seemingly the first time in his life. He would speak to the fact that if he would picture a woman, he would actually lose his erection, but it was at this time that he discovered he was actually attracted to boys. He would then start to notice his increasing attraction to boys. It was known that one of Anatoly's passions was exploration or tourism. In fact, he wanted to start to organize different hiking trips with children who would listen to his stories about the Far East. Anatoly may not have been able to speak to adults as he wanted to, but he was able to communicate with children. It was said that in this area, Anatoly was well respected and had won some awards for some short films that he had created. He apparently had begun to create amateur documentaries about the quote-unquote German atrocities that happened during World War II. Anyone from children to adults started to trust and enjoy Anatoly's company. This is when Anatoly would get a job in 1963 as a pioneer leader in a secondary school, or what we would call middle school, number 15. So, pioneer leaders would be what we would call here in the States like a Boy Scout leader, but this was his job. This is when the travel club would start to go throughout the country. The authorities in Novosibirsk actually gave the quote-unquote tourist club, aka Boy Scouts, a little wooden building in the year 1966 to have their get-togethers or meetings at. Anatoly would now spend his time taking local children out for outings that would teach the kids how to set up camp, how to start a fire, how to get across the river, and of course they went hiking. It was said that around this time that Anatoly's mother was starting to become a little concerned about Anatoly not having been married, and because of this, and wanting to keep his mother happy, Anatoly would go on to get married. Anatoly's younger sister was actually the one who would introduce Anatoly to his future wife, Lyudmila. Some sources said that while the couple didn't often engage in the act of sex due to Anatoly's erectile dysfunction problems, the married couple were able to end up having 2 children together. Anatoly himself would admit that during his marriage to his wife, that would end up being around 17 years long, that his wife and him only actually had sexual relations no more than a dozen times. Anatoly was said to have sought out medical help for his impotence problems, but sadly it was alleged that a nurse actually laughed at him. After Anatoly and his wife had their 2 boys, Igor in 1971 and Eugene in 1975, they stopped having sex altogether. This is a side note, but after I heard about their marriage, I was trying to think to myself, if they only had sex a dozen times, they must have had the best luck in the world to have gotten pregnant 2 out of the 12 times that they had sex. Especially back then, I don't even know what the knowledge was of ovulation in women, but wow. Unfortunately for the tourist club, the first little wooden building that was gifted to them would burn down in 1968. The club would then find a new location, and this is when Anatoly would rename the club Churgid. The kids who went on these outings with Anatoly loved the knowledge that he would bring to teaching the boys and girls about different herbs and trees, and was also said to have taught the children to be very respectful of nature. Churgid was said to have a somewhat strict type military or patriotic feel to it, and because of this, it became well known across the city of Novosibirsk. Anatoly was actually awarded a title, despite his lack of higher education, of Distinguished Teacher of the Soviet Union. One source said this award was handed to him by a woman named Lyudmila Kostina, who was the 3rd secretary of the CPSU, and after she learned of Anatoly's crimes, she actually committed suicide. It was said that Anatoly had wanted to encourage the boys and girls in the club and inserted a points system where the kids could earn points during their different outings or hikes, and the children could exchange those points for money. This, of course, caused the kids to absolutely love Anatoly, and in turn, it would be extremely easy for Anatoly to take advantage of these kids. At some point, Anatoly would ask the children to call him Tolik, which after I looked it up, it's like a nickname for Anatoly in Russia. Anatoly was described as being a thin, short man with muscular arms and was known for wearing worn pants and always had a plaid shirt on. He was said to have slightly bulging light blue eyes that seemed cold and emotionless when he was not joking around. This made it hard for the kids to know whether he was approving or disliking their behaviors or actions. I wonder if his emotionless eyes were like the empty eyes that we hear of with so many serial killers. When I was looking at the pictures of this guy, he seemed so intense, and apparently others thought this as well because of the bulge in his eyes, but I disagree. I think he just has the crazy eyes, and it's fucking scary. I will make sure to post the specific pictures that's freaky when you look at it this week on the Kill File socials. Anatoly was described as being calm and seemingly emotionally balanced, and at the same time, people around him took note of his air of secrecy and pride about him. He was said to have established a somewhat rigid disciplinary routine with the kids at the club, but apparently he never took it too far with the kids. He did not humiliate or treat the kids with cruelty that anyone knew of. Although many people would describe Anatoly as someone who didn't smile all that often, they didn't really call him joyless by any means. It was said that he actually liked to laugh, but he was known to, quote, joke with a serious expression on his face. Anatoly was said to be a well-spoken man with good reasoning, always got to the point and sometimes used colorful language. He was good at organizing outings for the children, which needed someone who was able to put in the work for the numerous details that was necessary for these different trips. What seemed to start out as a club meant to teach children, allow children to feel a sense of camaraderie and community, would turn into something dark, sadistic, and sickening. Somewhere along the way, Anatoly had read in some medical books that he enjoyed about something called retrograde amnesia. It spoke about how short suffocation of people could cause partial memory loss and could wipe away any memory that has to do with the experience of the suffocation. This would turn out to be Anatoly's MO. On June 2nd, 1964, Anatoly would conduct his first quote-unquote experiment on a young boy, and this would start the beginning of a series of experiments, and to some, he would express that these experiments would stretch their spines and make them grow. Anatoly from time to time would choose a boy for one of his experiments. He would approach the boy and ask if they wanted to be a part of his experiment, and of course they did. This guy was their leader. They looked up to him, respected him, trusted him, and wanted to be a part of his inner circle and a part of the secrecy that he had about him. When the boy would agree to this experiment, the boy knew this was going to consist of Anatoly essentially hanging the young man until he was unconscious, and then Anatoly would bring the boy back to life after he got him down. So, the boy would dress in his club uniform, stand on a platform or log or whatever, and place his head into the noose. Anatoly would then lift the boys off the stump and slowly lower the child until he was hanging and then would pass out. How do we know exactly what Anatoly did to the boys, you ask? Well, he filmed it. Yep, filmed it. And yep, I've seen them. Let me say, I didn't know how bad these were going to be until I watched them. They are still on the internet, and when and if you research the serial killer, you may run across them, or at least photos of them. I will say right off the bat that none of it is sexual, but they are shocking. I have come to realize that photos don't even compare to seeing what actually happens. Just a warning, these short films or videos or amateur snuff films are not for the faint of heart, and I do not recommend watching them. However, morbid curiosity is normal and natural and ingrained in us, so if you do, I will just say, good luck. Okay, so after this first boy was hanging but not dead, he took him down to the ground and masturbated over the boy and ejaculated onto the boy's shoes. When this boy would regain consciousness, it was said that he did not remember anything about what had just happened. Thus, the cycle of experiments was launched that would include luring boys into what he would call a survival experiment to test the degree of endurance and courage. Anatoly stated that he would need to film the boys during the experiments so he could document the outcome for his book that he wanted to write about the limits of human capabilities. A few months after Anatoly's first experiment, he would commit his first murder. 15-year-old Nikolai Dobryshev was persuaded to participate in these experiments, as Anatoly was never turned down by a boy. There was either promised money, which of course they wanted, or Anatoly would simply tell the boys he was trying to perfect the resuscitation technique, but whatever was said, the boys were willing participants, obviously having no idea what was actually going to happen. When Nikolai would suffocate and die while hanging, Anatoly brought him down and tried to resuscitate the child, and allegedly also tried heart massage, but nothing helped. I'm sorry, but isn't heart massage when the person's chest is cut open and the heart is literally squeezed gently by a doctor to keep the person alive? How exactly did Anatoly try to massage this kid's heart? Anyways, when Anatoly realized that the boy was not coming back, he freaked out and was scared and immediately started to get rid of the evidence and the body of Nikolai by cutting the deceased boy into multiple pieces and was said to have thrown the pieces into the Kuban, which after research is a river that eventually drains into the sea. Anatoly would conduct his experiments in various ways, from placing plastic bags over their heads to placing gas masks over them and telling them to breathe, but most often, he would use a noose that was made out of a rubber hose. In the aforementioned films, they were all hangings, and you could tell in the videos that the boys were not doing this against their will. Anatoly conducted his experiments in the most controlled environment, documenting everything that happened to the boys. It was said that during his court trial, Anatoly would state that he was able to bring the boys' stay in the quote-unquote next world to a full 9 minutes and would still then be able to revive the boy. More than 40 boys were used during these experiments that he was able to revive, and of course, they never knew what took place during those horrific minutes while they were unconscious. Some sources said that it was more like 100 boys. I don't know if we will ever really know how high the number went. Although Anatoly did bring these children back to life, some of these poor children suffered grave consequences. Some of them would go on to be disabled or have different diseases for life, seemingly from these experiments. Anatoly was able to conduct these disgusting acts for another 10 years-ish before he killed the next boy, which is just horrific. Of course, the parents had no idea what was going on with their children because the boys had no memory of it. And if it weren't for Anatoly's personal diary, documentation, and horrible short films that he made, there may be no way of knowing for sure what he did. On November 14th, 1973, Anatoly killed a 15-year-old boy named Alexander Nezhmyanov. Alexander apparently had been growing out his hair, and the teacher then asked Alexander's mother to please cut it, which, don't get me started on that, but we will move past it. Then Alexander told his mother that he'd been growing it out because he had been cast in a movie, but wanted her to keep that a secret to herself. I guess. Then Alexander's mother told the teacher about why he was growing his hair out, and in turn, the teacher had mocked Alexander in front of the entire class. What a bitch. Of course, Alexander was crushed and told his mother that he was never going to tell her anything ever again. Sadly, Alexander would leave for school one day and he would never be seen again. When Alexander went missing, there was an investigation launched where the authorities searched in the Don forests, and they even launched a dive team into the Kuban River, but unfortunately nothing was found. Even though the Russian national media had shown a picture of Alexander's face, no one was ever able to say that they saw him. Who provided the picture for the media? Anatoly, of course. The only person in the world who actually knew what happened to this poor child was Anatoly the monster. Alexander had been hung from a tree, killed, dismembered, and then buried. Anatoly pretended to be none the wiser when it came to what happened to Alexander when his mother desperately asked if he knew anything. Apparently, Anatoly actually helped organize a search of Alexander, and upwards of 200 kids from the club came to help in the Don forests. It was thought that Alexander may have been kidnapped by gypsies. Alexander's mother then traveled all around the Soviet Union looking for her boy, but of course, she never found him. So I guess there was a prisoner who was located in one of the colonies during the winter of 1974 to 75. He wrote out a confession admitting to the killing of Alexander, and then said that he buried his corpse on one of the islands of the Kuban River. This man then drew out some maps as to where Alexander allegedly was buried, and of course it turned up nothing for the authorities. And then it would come to light that this prisoner, of course, did not kill Alexander. He stated that he just wanted to, quote-unquote, unwind by writing to the city of Novorossiysk. First off, what a shitty thing to do to someone who's missing, like, family and community, wanting answers about this boy. You are just a dickhead, first and foremost. Also, I will never in my life understand why people do this. Why do they falsely confess to murders they didn't commit? I do not get it. I think it's one thing when people are, like, led into a confession, like someone who is more gullible or has, like, a diminished mental capacity, and the police just want to close the case and kind of lead the person to confess, or when they're, like, basically tortured into a false confession. That I understand. But I am talking about people who take pride or enjoy the attention of claiming a murder that they did not commit. Why? How are people so twisted or lonely or desperate for the attention that comes with the confession of a murder? This happens a lot, and I will just never understand it. People are just so fucked up. Here is a little excerpt from his personal journal, graciously interpreted by someone on Reddit, and I will give the link to that article in the episode notes. Quote, Alexander had a part in my movie, An Incident in the Forest. The other day, I couldn't help but suggest that he try out for a new role, this time the protagonist. I hoped half-heartedly that he would refuse, but he agreed. What is going to happen now? I'm tired of the futile struggle with myself, which I almost always end up losing. What did I do to deserve this torture? End quote. What? Are you seriously so delusional that you think you are somehow the victim? Holy shit, dude, get a grip. I also remember during my research reading that Anatoly had allegedly tried to commit suicide at some point but had failed. I just don't believe this kind of shit like, oh, I didn't want to murder them, I just couldn't help myself, or this poor me bullshit. No. You could stop if you want. You just don't do it. You leave. You move. You kill yourself properly. It's not that hard. You don't pretend that it bothers you and then keep doing it. Apparently, when Anatoly did murder any of these boys, he would destroy the evidence and film that he made of the experiment so it could not be led back to him. May 11th, 1975, Anatoly would commit his next murder of an 11-year-old boy named Andrei Pogasyan. The very next day, Andrei's backpack and clothes were actually found on an embankment. There would be a thorough search for Andrei around the banks and also in the Kuban River, but unfortunately nothing was found. So it turns out for this poor child that Andrei had told his parents that he was actually going to a quote-unquote film shooting that was allegedly being carried out by a man in the Don Forest. In fact, Andrei had asked his mother to buy him some new swim trunks for this specific reason, which breaks my fucking heart. Ugh, I hate this so much. So, one investigator who had collected this information knew that it was important, and it was said that this man had sent it specifically to the Novosibirsk DIA so they could find the man shooting these films. Unfortunately, the investigator then went to Moscow for some advanced training and then was transferred to a different region's prosecutorial office, and in turn, there was never an investigation into who the man filming was. During all of this time, Turgid Club was making waves in the city, having a reputation for being so upstanding and good for children to learn and adventure. It got to the point where Anatoly had to actually turn families down because they were overcrowded. Anatoly at times was revered and cherished within the city. Anatoly's next killing actually took place quite a bit after the last. In fact, forensic experts would say that Anatoly was able to control himself. They would further say that Anatoly was highly intelligent, had some level of morals, and even social maturity. However, it was stated that Anatoly's lack of a sex life would bring him back to being aroused by the image of the boy from the accident, covered in blood and twitching in pain. He would say later on that his visions from the accident from 1961 would haunt him and often pop into his head. Anatoly would take his next victim in 1980, and this would sadly be a 13-year-old boy named Sergei Fatnev. There wasn't much known about this victim, sadly, but after he disappeared, there would be a search for the missing teen, and then the case would be closed, again, not being tied to the fact that he was part of the Turgid Club like many of the others. Before we move on to the last murder victim of Anatoly Slivko, we are going to talk about many of the horrible things that he did to the boys during their state of unconsciousness, or after he murdered the ones he did. It was said that many of the boys who had no memory of what had happened after being strung up by Anatoly only later figured out what could have happened to them while they were unconscious when all of Anatoly's crimes came to light. So, it was known that while the boys were unconscious, he would film himself doing his disturbing acts, and these films would sort of satisfy him to watch again and again until he needed another victim. The films after they were found would later show that Anatoly would hang the boy and then bring him down onto the ground, strip the boy naked, and then he would molest and fondle the boy and proceed to arrange their unconscious bodies into different suggestive positions, and then he would masturbate over them. Then Anatoly would revive the child, or sometimes they would wake up on their own, having no memory whatsoever about what just happened to him. Anatoly would kind of bribe many of the boys into secrecy about the experiments or the films that they were just making. The boys who were murdered had unfortunately been treated in a completely different, twisted manner. It was said that he would actually go on to play quote-unquote games with the corpses. Anatoly would take his actions further each time, pushing the limit of his sick capabilities. After the boy was deceased, he would sometimes rehang the child on rope or stretch the corpse out and display them in various poses. He would saw and cut the corpse of the victim on film, and he was said to have made up different, quote, figures from dismembered limbs, end quote. During one video, it was seen that one of the severed heads from a victim was displayed and surrounded by the severed legs, and always the boys had on polished shoes. Anatoly was known to press the uniforms himself in preparation of these experiments, complete with polished shoes. He would sometimes also open up the victims' chests and film the various internal organs, and he would examine them himself. It was said that Anatoly would sometimes collect the blood in a prepared specific tray, and then he would actually drink the blood of his victims with a spoon. Anatoly would sometimes cover the boys' shoes in gas, and then he would set them ablaze, all the while trying to recreate that first accident scene where his spark of sadism came from. Anatoly would sometimes saw off the victim's feet inside the boots or saw the foot in half still inside the boot. He was also said to have cut off the victim's cheeks, ears, nose, and sometimes cut out the eyes as well. Anatoly would also salt the genitals of the victims that he had just cut off and put them in glass jars. I don't know what he did with the genitals, but I can only imagine, and holy shit, this sick fuck. I also realized during my research that not only was he trying to recreate this first horrific scene that he saw with the boy, but the polished shoes seems to go back to the German soldier who had killed that boy and then wiped off his shiny shoes. It really puts into perspective or light that things from your adulthood always come from your childhood. I didn't find these descriptions until towards the end of my research, and it explained some of the stuff that I saw on the horrible videos that I stumbled across. Some of the things that Anatoly would do to the young victims after their deaths would have taken up to a few hours to complete. Anatoly would later state in his personal diary that he didn't feel disgust when he was dismembering his victims. Instead, he, quote, assessed the situation, whatever that means. He went on to admit that he would bury the body parts and corpses of his victims and often burned their clothing with gas. He said he had prepared in advance for these occasions. He would say that for each quote-unquote sexual intercourse, he would need to see blood, but that after his sexual tension was gone, he would know what he did was impossible and bad. Anatoly Slivko was called a necrophiliac serial killer, though I never read anything about the actual, rape of a corpse, rather his masturbation. So I'm not sure if he's referring to his masturbation as the sexual intercourse or what. He said he had thought to try and take as many pictures and films of his actions to try and satisfy his urges, basically saying that he was trying to find other ways besides murder for his sexual gratification. Ugh, you fucking pig. He went on to say that he did not smoke or drink and that alcohol always made him feel bad. He said that he did try to get drunk in order to feel attraction to a woman, but it didn't work. He said because he worked with children, he felt a moral obligation to not smell of alcohol when he was with the kids. I'm sorry, you felt a moral obligation to not smell like alcohol around the kids, but murdering them or sexually abusing or exploiting them was perfectly fine? What kind of weird-ass logic is that, you fucking prick? He went on to say that he tried to construct a doll so that he didn't have to kill anyone else, basically to have sex with, but I guess it didn't work. You know what would work? Just cut off your pecker. That would work. This sicko even went as far as admitting that he had these sick desires about his own 2 sons. Yeah. He said when he was home alone and had what he called sexual pressures, he, quote, imagined my son in a similar situation, end quote. You can't convince me that this man had any real connection to his children. There is just no fucking way that you feel any parental bond to your sons and then admit to masturbating about them in horrific ways. He was not specific if he meant the motorcycle accident situation or the dismembering situation he inflicted on the other boys, but either way, that is just so sick and twisted. I am very curious to see if they reveal this fucker's pathology in my own research anywhere. Gross. Okay, so Anatoly's last victim was a 13-year-old boy named Sergei Pavlov. The experiment on this boy would take place on July 23rd, 1985. Sergei would leave his home around 7 a.m. that morning and told his parents that he was headed out to go fishing on a river called Barsuchki. I couldn't find a pronunciation for that river, so I'm sorry if I butchered that. I tried. I guess Sergei had actually told his neighbor, a woman named Lydia Polivinka, that he was actually headed out to meet the leader of the Churgid Club, Anatoly Slivko, and said that Anatoly was going to be taking his pictures for a quote-unquote illustrated magazine. So, when Sergei didn't return home that evening, it was actually his neighbor Lydia who would call the Churgid Club and asked Anatoly if he had seen Sergei. Anatoly told the neighbor that he had not seen Sergei, and then the very next day, Anatoly had taken a group of the club children to the Black Sea. Because of this trip, the investigator couldn't speak to Anatoly about the missing boy. Sergei's mother, Antonia, was not having this and contacted the police. She said they promised to look into it, but never did. Then his mother took her concerns and complaints to the city prosecutor, who thought the case seemed criminal, and because of this, there would be a case opened for a possible premeditated murder, and the case was handed to an investigator. It was also noted that this was not the first missing teenage boy in this area. November 13th, 1985, the assistant to the city prosecutor, a woman named Tamara Lingueva, would be put on the case. It was said this investigation was hard and different speculations were made. One of them, maybe a family member of Sergei, had been involved in his disappearance, and another was that he could have simply just drowned. Tamara was really the first person to link the missing teenage boy cases together. She realized that Sergei, among the other boys, were all a part of the Churgid Club. After speaking with some of Sergei's friends from the club, Tamara actually learned about the filming of different movies. It said she was shocked by what she saw as a common theme to these movies, which included scenes of main characters hanging and tortures. But the teens had told her that they didn't actually get hung for real, instead just under their armpits and just kind of pretended to be hanged. Tamara was taken aback even further when some of the boys started telling her about these alleged medical experiments that the leader of the club was conducting on the boys. Unfortunately, despite Tamara's thorough questioning, she wasn't able to get any details from the boys about these experiments. At the same time that Tamara was starting to get a sense about what was going on at the club, a woman named Elena Proida, who apparently worked in the children's room of the local police, heard rumors about the experiments and the secret cinema that was going on at Churgid. After Anatoly was investigated further, it was found that he was, in fact, the director of Churgid. That information collected showed he had a job at the chemical plant, but he was now full-time at the club. And his track record showed that he was a hard worker at the club as well as home. Unfortunately, because no one really knew what was going on, it was said that the whole city seemed to stand behind Anatoly, believing his established reputation of a quote-unquote experienced teacher. With the numerous awards he had won and glowing reviews of the activities conducted at the club, it was hard for people to see anything other than this seemingly amazing children's club director who really seemed to care and connect with the children. However, the investigator couldn't shake the feeling that Anatoly was somehow connected to these various disappearances. Even though the reputation of Anatoly somewhat hindered the investigation and put pressure on the investigator, as Anatoly was backed by some bigwigs in the city committee as well, eventually, because there weren't any other suspects in the disappearances coupled with the strange experiment stories, the city prosecutor was finally able to get a search warrant for Anatoly's apartment and the premises of Churgid. On December 28, 1985, authorities would come to the club during some classes that Anatoly was conducting with the children. At first, the authorities couldn't find any type of evidence pointing to anything out of the ordinary, until a police officer saw a door, and on the door there was a sign that read, quote, "Don't get in, he'll kill you." And when they asked Anatoly what was in there, Anatoly's face changed. If this is the picture, I saw this one picture of this sick fuck, and his face just looks like somebody ran over his dog, like shocked and saddened at the same time, and it said that it was taken on this day, and I hope that that was the moment that they asked him about this door. Behind the door, the authorities found a photo lab, some knives, axes for camping, various ropes, and rubber hose loops. And to top this all off, the disturbing pictures of bound as well as dismembered children. The authorities, I guess, were able to find hundreds of meters of film with the different torture and murder scenes. They also contained the filming of dismembering the kids. They also found a pioneer uniform, which is like the Boy Scouts uniform he always made them dress in. And they found a bunch of children's shoes, and some of them had sawed-off toes. Of course, Anatoly was immediately arrested. What a sloppy motherfucker. I mean, I think it speaks to his level of confidence that he didn't think he was ever going to get caught, that he kept this shit at the actual club. I mean, I'm glad that he did because he got caught, but really, dude? What a moron. In January and February of 1986, he would confess to 7 of the murders, and then took authorities to the various crime scenes, and they were able to retrieve 6 of the children's remains in the Don forests. Unfortunately, the murders committed earlier on in Anatoly's killing spree were never found. I saw that the news of Anatoly being arrested had spread like wildfire through the city, but many people had no idea what he was arrested for. All they knew was that this respected man and teacher was put in jail. It was noted that Anatoly's wife and children were taken to an entirely new city the day after he was arrested, and I wondered if this was for their own safety, like maybe once the news got out about what he had done. I guess Anatoly's arrest had blowback for other people as well. It was said that the head of the city police, Colonel Antonenko, was actually removed from his post and then was sent to work in what was referred to as a strict regime colony, and he would work there as a deputy head. I'm just guessing that that's probably some sort of a demotion. This is when the woman who had actually handed Anatoly his awards for being such an amazing teacher had committed suicide. After Anatoly was arrested, the Churgid Club was turned over to the city government, and I guess to this day remains as a center for children and youth tourism in the same building. What? Why? My kid wouldn't go there, that's for damn sure. Anatoly's trial would take place in June of 1986. The trial was said to be a quick one because there was so much damning evidence. I mean, films and photographs alone would do it. It was said there were ambulances that had to be on constant duty near the courthouse during the trial because many people who were involved in the trial process had heart attacks or what they called hypertensive crises after watching the films made by Anatoly Slivko. I guess before anyone was watching it in court, they asked if he had anything to say about it. He said something about like the disgrace in the human race and that he was afraid for people to watch it. I always wonder when I hear these types of cases where so many people were fooled by someone and the person was like somewhat important in their community and well liked, and then they find out that they are this sick pervert or murderer, especially of children. Like, what was that like to find that out? Also, I want to see the look on the killer's face when he knows that all the people that liked him found out the real him. What happens there? Like, this reminds me of John Wayne Gacy, where he was so loved and then people found out what a sick fuck he was. I know he kept denying his stuff until he didn't, but is it just like the facade just drops and his real face is revealed? Or what do they act like when they're confessing to the sick fucks that they are? I have always wondered what that interaction is like. And what was it like for Anatoly to see people that he knew in court that had trusted him for so long? Fascinating. Okay, so as far as Anatoly's mental health condition, I guess he was interviewed or analyzed twice, and once by the Serbsky Institute, which we have heard of in Moscow before. They said that he was sane, and also there was a presence of, quote, organic psychopathy, which is like a personality disorder that happens or presents after organic or natural changes in the brain. They also said, of course, he had sexual perversions, including, quote, pedophilia, necrophilia, sadism, necrosadism, fetishism, vampirism, and pyromania, end quote. Dude, what a list. That's like all the things. Apparently during his trial, Anatoly showed a lot of remorse and cried often. Where was this before you killed those innocent children, you sick fuck? You're sad you got caught. Go fuck yourself. Anatoly Slivko was sentenced to death, and even though his lawyer tried to get a pardon for him, in 1987, the Presidium of the Supreme Soviet of the USSR refused the pardon. It was noted that people on death row here, they don't know when their death sentence is going to be carried out, so they're terrified all of the time. Like that anytime a door opens or someone walks down the hall, that it could be them coming to carry out their death sentence. I love this. Why is this not a thing here? Yes, let these sick fucks be terrified all the time. They deserve it. Before Anatoly was executed, a psychiatrist visited him and gave him a green notebook asking him to write his deepest thoughts and confessions because the psychiatrist wanted to learn more about maniacs. Anatoly did fill the journal with all of his thoughts and his last confessions. At the second meeting, when Anatoly returned the notebook to the psychiatrist, there was someone posing as his assistant to record the entire interaction, as they said that the psychiatrist had just learned that Anatoly Slivko was about to be executed a few hours later. It was then said that Anatoly was executed on September 16th, 1989, with one gunshot to the head. And that, my friends, is the story of Anatoly Slivko, pedophile, necrophiliac, sadist, and child murderer. This case, right? Heavy one for sure. So this case was really interesting to me because of the aspect of so much respect and community support surrounding this sick fuck who filmed his crimes against children like they were old-timey short comedy films, except they were death films. I could not believe it. Okay, I saved this until the end, so if you don't want to hear about the videos that I saw, then you can be done for today, and I hope to see you next week. I know this is about to be awful for those of you who stayed, but I have to get it off my chest. I have to talk about this, and I have no one in my life who wants to hear about murders and fucked up shit with me, so I have to tell you guys, because, hi, you're here for murder. Okay, so the videos I saw of Anatoly hanging a few of these boys were horrific. There was one video where the boy was laying down on the ground and there was like a noose around his neck and each of his hands and feet being tied and they were pulled on, like pulling the boy in different directions. And it was so awful. I think like not only because of what you're watching, but because it was like so old-timey that you can't really tell, like, is the boy awake? I mean, I guess he had to be unconscious because he was filming, but holy shit, there was another one where he crossed the boy's foot over his other leg and started sawing off the tip of his foot, like right below the toes. Holy shit. I cannot unsee this stuff, you guys. It's awful. Awful. And the last part that I want to say to get it off my brain is one particular part where he actually hacked at a boy's knee and just took his leg right off there. Oh my God, the thought of that makes me shiver. I'm assuming that the boys were already dead or he wouldn't have cut them, but I have just never seen something so shocking in my life. I audibly gasped to myself and like covered my mouth. I couldn't tell if you could see blood or not. I might have, but again, they're so old-timey. They're like those short, funny, like, they seemed like those short little funny or weird films that you see that make that like tick, 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 tick noise. So the details are kind of hard to see, which is fine with me. And of course, once was enough. I am definitely not going to go back to watch or anything like that. Like, I still can't believe that these are on the internet so readily available. Like, what? Ugh. I immediately felt like my trauma response brain kick in, like, nope, I didn't just see that, and wiped it clean out. But then, of course, having to finish up this case, it came back, so I had to get it out. Thank you for letting me share my horrific experience with you guys. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this case. Sorry if I just ruined your whole day, but it ruined mine, so solidarity, my friends. I hope to see you guys next week for another case here on The Kill File. Stay safe, you guys. Bye. Well, that's it for today, you guys. Thanks so much for hanging out with me and listening to another episode of The Kill File. Don't forget to check out the merch shop, either at thekillfile.com and click Shop Merch, or you can visit thekillfile.printify.me/products for some awesome true crime merch. Also, follow along on the Kill File's socials for posts about episodes, pictures about the cases, for updates, and more. We are on Facebook, Instagram, and X as The Kill File, and we are on YouTube and TikTok as The Kill File Podcast. Also, feel free to check out the website at thekillfile.com, where you can learn more about me, your host. You can learn a little bit more about how The Kill File got started, and you can suggest a case right there on the website. Let me know in your case suggestion if you want me to shout out your name if I cover your case. There is contact info on the site as well. You guys have no idea how much I love to hear from you. It makes my whole day. Come back on Mondays wherever you get your podcast fix when we will cover another case on The Kill File, where nothing stays buried forever. Stay safe, you guys. Bye.